Unit 3, Income Tax, Allowances and Rebates, Lecture 1, Taxable Allowances. Taxable Allowances. Moving on with the taxable income framework. For now we will skip step 4, as CG2 will be covered in an upcoming unit. Step 5 is the adding of taxable business allowances provided to an employee by the employer. Allowances should not be confused with reimbursements. A reimbursement is when a business expense is made by an employee and they are subsequently reimbursed by the employer. These amounts are also not taxable. The types of business allowances that we'll be looking at are travel allowances and subsistence allowances. The taxable portion of such an allowance is calculated by taking the amount given as an allowance less the business portion. Travel allowances are subject to PAYE or pay as you earn at 20% if the employer is satisfied that 80% of the vehicle was used for business purposes. If not, 80% of the allowance is taxed upfront. Any part of the allowance that was not spent still has to be included in gross income, and the business portion may be deducted. To determine the business portion, a logbook must be used. Here's the travel allowance tax table for the 2019 year of assessment. For a travel allowance, there is no deemed business or private travel estimates allowed. One has to keep accurate travel records. Victoria uses a car during the entire year for business and private travel. The cost of a car is R305,000 inclusive of VAT, and she receives a travel allowance of R9,800 per month from her employer. Calculate her taxable travel allowance. Her total travel allowance received is R170,600, which is your monthly allowance of R9,800 multiplied by 12. The cost element is determined by using the value of the car and referring to the travel allowance tax tables. This will give you a total cost per kilometer of R5.20, and this figure will also be used to calculate the deductible business portion. The taxable amount is therefore R63,000. A subsistence allowance is granted to employees to cover any out-of-town expenditure, such as accommodation, meals, or any incidental costs. If an employee cannot prove any expenditure, the following rates will apply. Mr. Mashlangu received the following amounts while on a business trip: an allowance of R2,000 per night for accommodation, and an advance of R12,000. He only spent R7,000 and returned R2,000 to his employer. Calculate the amount that needs to be included in his taxable income. Since Mr. Mashlangu received a total amount of R10,000 and kept accurate records of his expenditure, only R4,000 will be included as a taxable allowance. With regards to the R12,000 advance that he received, he kept accurate records of R7,000 in expenses, as well as returned R2,000 to his employer. Therefore, only R3,000 will be included as a taxable allowance.